these problems, I think what I was realizing over the summer is that all of these problems are the same problem. Hi friends, welcome back to this corner of the internet. Thank you so much for being here. Today I'm going to tell you all about the books that I read over the course of summer. I don't really know. The season has been very strange, but let's just say from July to September. I'm filming this in the first week of October, so I have also read a couple of other books that I may mention. Because I'm not going to be doing a autumn wrap-up. I'm just going to be doing my favorite books of 2021. So let's just talk about all the books that I've read basically since we last talked. There are a handful of books that I started and I didn't finish. I'm only going to be mentioning the ones that I started and I intend to finish. Basically not the ones that I started and I was just like not feeling it. So that's the idea. I hope you're excited. You know the drill. Let's talk about books. So before we begin, some reflections on my season of reading. The biggest thing that defined my reading this season was I started working at a bookshop. This has been like a lifelong dream of mine. I've always dreamt of being a bookseller and it's happened. It's happening. I work like one day a week. It's nothing, but it's so fun. And it's meant that because I work at a secondhand bookshop, like I get 50% off of all secondhand books. It's ridiculous, honestly. So I have accumulated quite a bit of books recently. And the other thing that defined my reading has been... Sorry. Bob, please don't fall. You okay? Oh god, okay. So other than working at a bookshop, I've also recently joined Storygraph, which has completely changed the game in terms of how I actually understand my reading, and it means that my 2021 wrap-up should be very good. I will have hard and soft data for you guys. If you don't know, Storygraph is like an alternative to Goodreads. I assume that if you're watching this video, you already know that. But just having like visual like pie charts and graphs to represent my reading is so satisfying. I never joined Goodreads because I was just never excited by the platform, but this is like, it's just completely changed the game. So that's been a huge thing that defined my reading this season. Just being able to see things, and oh my gosh, there's gonna be so much like data analysis in my wrap-up for the year. I'm so excited. The next question is something that in the last wrap-up I mentioned I'm not super comfortable with the way that I phrased the question, so I've rephrased the question. I used to ask myself like how many BIPOC authors did I read, how many LGBT stories did I read, but I feel like that's just very quantitative and doesn't really tell you anything about, or doesn't tell me anything about what I'm interested in and how I'm learning and like all that stuff. So the new question is, what social or political topics did I engage with in my readings, and how did the authors' identities reflect this? So it's much more open-ended, and I feel like it tells you a lot more about what kind of stuff I'm interested in reading at the moment and what kind of thing I'm learning about. And so this season, I was reading a lot about female queerness, female body autonomy, environmental and animal justice. Those were the topics that I found myself drawn to over the course of the summer. And the authors' identities reflected this. You'll see, but like authors from multiple continents, across multiple disciplines, and with multiple sexualities. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you guys about the books that I read on those topics. And finally, did I enjoy my reading? Did I reread anything? Do I have any new favorites? Yes to all of those questions. You will see. I'm so excited about this. I had such a good summer of books. So without further ado, let's begin the wrap-up. All right, so I didn't really read anything in July. I think I read one thing in July. And I didn't technically finish it, although at the beginning of this book, the author literally says there's no right or wrong way to read this. It's such a chunky book that Well, okay, the book is Slug by Hollie McNish. Hollie McNish is a poet who writes in a very, very accessible way, and often like writes about sex and masturbation and female sexuality, the female orgasm, things like that. But she wrote this throughout lockdown, or at least compiled the book throughout lockdown, and it kind of defies genre. Like, it's not just poetry, it's also essays. There are a few short stories in the collection, and it's split up into, I think it's seven sections, each covering a different topic. The first topic is endings, and it talks a lot about grief and losing her maternal grandmother, which was very emotional for me to read because I lost my maternal grandmother last year. And I thought she did it so well, like the way that she talked about grief. The thing is, it's a really, when I say accessible, it is such an accessible book. Because it's also so funny, like the way that she creates poetry but doesn't take it too seriously. I feel like that's the vibe that I got from reading this. I mentioned grief, but she talks about giving birth, she talks about being a mother, she talks about being a teenager, she talks about gender and like how we gender boys and girls from before they even understand what that means and how toxic that is. She talks about so much stuff in here. And the essays also are really fun and interesting because they help illuminate some of the lines in the poetry. Other times they expand on the topic by giving you more like of a nonfiction perspective. Let me read you a poem. If I can find it. It's such a big book. It's literally like 500 pages, so. Okay, this one's really good because it kind of draws on gender and being a woman and grandmothers and, all of that. So this one's called Lie Back and Think of Scotland. And she jokes, in our day it was just lie back and think of England. And she jokes, for Scottish women, that was even worse. And she jokes, oh, you young ones, so provocative. And she jokes, we were told it was normal if it hurt. And I sigh and say, that one hasn't changed. And she jokes, we weren't told that we could crave things too. And she jokes, sex was just like any other set domestic chore. And she jokes, the clitoris, we thought it was a herb. And she jokes, shopping in our heads whilst we were bored. And I sigh and say, that one hasn't changed. And she jokes, how much we love to read romantic novels. And she jokes, the wedding night, how excited we were then. And she jokes, the disappointment once the deed was done. And she jokes, if only we could live that part again. And she jokes, it's a pity that we can't. And she jokes, and neither of us laugh. I just love the line, the clitoris, we thought it was a herb. It's too good. There were so many moments that made me laugh and then moments that made me cry. And like, I've been talking for 8 minutes, so I'm gonna put this book down. But yeah, this was the only book I read in July and I don't regret it. Okay, August was a good month to get me back into reading because I picked up In the Dreamhouse by Carmen Machado. And oh my God, when I tell you I read this in a single day, I started it in the morning. As soon as I picked it up from the bookstore, I just began reading and I just could not stop. The writing in here is so good. It's so addicting. The chapters are really short and it's just so fascinating and so chilling the way that she writes. So In the Dreamhouse is a memoir that talks about Carmen Machado's toxic queer relationship. Essentially, she was in a relationship with a woman in her 20s and she didn't realize that she was actually in an abusive relationship, but it kind of tells the story of this realization of this relationship in the second person. So she's addressing you, but she's also addressing herself. So it's kind of written as if it's like a diary and you're reading your own story. Every chapter is exploring this concept of a dream house, and it kind of plays on a lot of like gothic horror elements as well. So like the haunted house, Queer villainy is a really big thing in Gothic horror, and there's all of these like different tropes that she gets to explore. And so it's kind of academic and it's kind of intellectual, but then it's also so personal and so brutal and so just stunning the way that she writes. I think what was most interesting and what I learned most from this book was how often people who are in like these toxic dynamics, they don't realize they're in toxic dynamics because abusers are so often portrayed as men and so often like gendered in that way. And so when you're in a lesbian relationship or when you're in a queer relationship, it can be confusing because you don't understand, you've never thought of a woman as an abuser. And so her experience was so valuable, and the way that she writes was like stunning, and I just found it fascinating and I couldn't put it down. And I immediately, and when I say immediately, I mean I spent 2 days without reading Carmen Machado, and then I was like, no, I need more. So I went and I picked up Her Body and Other Parties, which is a short story collection of hers, which was published before in the Dreamhouse. And wow. I'm not a big short story reader. I'm not someone who loves a short story. I can never really finish short story collections either. But this one gripped me, and I again could not put it down, except I had to put it down at times because it was so emotional and so eerie and creepy and horrific at times, but in an inexplicable kind of way. And then I had to put it down and process what I had just read and then pick it back up later. So it was much slower. It was a much slower read than the previous one. But it was so good. And honestly, after reading this and affirming the fact that Carmen Maria Machado is one of my favorite writers now, I'm just dying to get my hands on a novel or another short story collection that she writes. But I should say that, so the concept for this collection is basically, again, female sexuality and sexual violence, but through the lens of these Gothic horror, kind of like a Gothic horror tone. It kind of reads like Shirley Jackson, and also sort of these very mundane moments that end up becoming really creepy or distorted through either a magical realism element or just a detail that's been written in such a good way that you can't get it out of your head, and it just shapes the way that you see every scene in the story. My favorite story in here is probably the first one, which talked about this. It was basically a love story that maybe it was set in the 70s, and it was this teenage girl who just met her, a boyfriend, and they were getting together, and it follows them all the way to into their marriage and having kids and stuff. And the creepy thing about the story is that this girl, she has so much power, she's so empowered in her sexuality, which is amazing to read. But then there's this, there's a twist, which is that there's this part of her body, which in the story is basically a bow that's wrapped around her neck, that her partner is not allowed to touch. And it's the one boundary she has. When it comes to sex, she's completely open, she's completely free to do whatever she wants and is in control. But then her partner feels entitled to have this part of her that she set this boundary around. And so it's a great metaphor for sexual violence and male entitlement to the female body. And it was so well done, because I felt so creeped out and violated on this character's behalf. But at the same time, it was a silly little detail, this ribbon, wasn't her, well, it was her body. But anyway, so there was also a really creepy story about someone who was working in a dress shop, and women were disappearing, physically becoming invisible and becoming transparent and see-through. And that was a really good metaphor for how society views women and how they don't see them, and how they don't have ownership over their bodies. I mean, this was just a really fantastic collection, but this was a topic that was just on my mind throughout the whole summer. This idea of ownership and bodies and, you know, who is entitled to the female body and why even like the person themselves doesn't feel entitled to it because of the way that society has structured power. I guess something that kind of got me before, I don't know if I started reading it before or after Carmen Machado, but something that was also on my mind on this topic was Nawal Saadawi and the feminist writing that she's done. And so I picked up The Hidden Face of Eve, which in Arabic is it's like translated differently. So it's like the naked face of the Arab woman, but in English it's translated to The Hidden Face of Eve, and the subtitle is Women in the Arab World. Nawal Saadawi is like a really famous Egyptian first wave feminist, and she wrote this phenomenal book that I really could only read 100 pages of before feeling so triggered that I had to put it down for mental health reasons. But it was so insightful because Nawal Saadawi wrote this in the 70s, I want to say. It was published 1980. But she was writing about the generation that came before her. So she was probably born, you know, in the like 40s and or 30s even, and she was writing about the generation even before her that shaped her generation. And so this is basically was me reading about my grandparents and the world that they lived in Egypt, and you know, the condition of the Arab world up till that point, all the way into the late 20th century, when, you know, I was born in the 90s. But it still has such an impact on all of us, you know, like as Arab women, it's the specter of FGM and sexual violence and male domination and just like the restrictions, the boundaries around every single young woman growing up in Egypt and growing up in the Arab world. It's everywhere, you know, it's inescapable. And Nawal Saadawi was a medical practitioner, and so this is like an essay collection of hers where she talks about some of her patients. She talks about psychology and medical practices and also some history and sociology and literature near the end, which I didn't really get to. She talks about abortion. She talks about, like I said, sexual violence. She talks about the psychology of women who from a very, very young age as young girls are abused, but also restricted. Like, even if it doesn't reach the point of abuse, there is a kind of abuse that is psychological, that is the product of a consistent denial of any kind of natural desire that a young girl has. So there's this amazing section at the beginning of chapter 2, which starts, all children who are born healthy and normal feel that they are complete human beings. This is, however, not so for the female child. From the moment she is born, and even before she learns to pronounce words, the way people look at her, the expression in their eyes, and their glances somehow indicate that she was born incomplete or with something missing. From the day of her birth to the moment of her death, a question will continue to haunt her. Why? Why is it that preference is given to her brother despite the fact that they are the same, or that she may even be superior to him in many ways, or at least in some aspects? The first aggression experienced by the female child in society is the feeling that people do not welcome her coming into the world. The education that a female child receives in Arab society is a series of continuous warnings about things that are supposed to be harmful, forbidden, shameful, or outlawed by religion. The child, therefore, is trained to suppress her own desires, to empty herself of authentic, original wants and wishes linked to her own self, and to fill the vacuum that results with the desires of others. Education of female children is therefore transformed into a slow process of annihilation, a gradual throttling of her personality and mind, leaving intact only the outside shell, the body a lifeless mold of muscle and bone and blood that moves like a wound-up rubber doll. A girl who has lost her personality, her capacity to think independently and use her own mind, will do what others have told her and will become a toy in their hands and a victim of their decisions. Which was like so resonant. It was so intense. Even just reading that was just, whew, there's so much intensity there, but like so much truth. And I feel like the way that she writes, I mean, I really appreciate the translation of this because I don't think I would have gotten so much out of it if I was reading it in Arabic. I do know that there's like differences between the translation and the original, especially like in terms of like which topics they covered, because of the audiences that would pick up the English versus the Arabic. But yeah, like this was the first Nawal Saadawi that I'd read, and I really hope to finish it this year. But if I don't get to finish it this year, I'm definitely going to be coming back to it in the future, because it's so important. And I felt like I was learning so much about my own culture and about myself and about my parents and my grandparents, and just like mind expansion in this book. So important. But yeah, this really like set the tone for understanding and starting to read more about female sexuality and like feminism from that lens. And yeah, kind of sparked my interest for things like Carmen Machado's fiction. So yeah, okay, that's Nawal Saadawi, Queen. The last book, I guess, on this topic before we move on to kind of more environmental stuff that I was reading, is this book, C+nto and Other Poems by Joelle Taylor. It's actually blurred by Hollie McNish, I've just realized, and it says visionary and powerful. I loved it, which is so accurate. It's truly visionary. It's truly powerful. And it's so like satisfying to read, because I feel like the things that short stories can do and the things that memoirs can do are completely different to the things that poetry can do. And when you read something in a poem, it just lands different. It just hits different. So C+nto and Other Poems, it says on the back, enters the private lives of women from the butch counterculture, telling the inside story of the protests they led in the 90s to reclaim their bodies as their own, their difficult balance between survival and self-expression. History, magic, rebellion, party, and sermon vibrate through Joelle Taylor's cantos to uncover these underground communities forged by women. It's part memoir. I actually went to a poetry reading and signing for this book, so this is an edition that's signed for me, which is, it feels like amazing to have met this poet, because she's so talented, and I really appreciated the kind of choices that the collection made, how personal it was. You know, she talks a lot about different communities. She talks mainly about communities that she was a part of in London in the 90s, and a lot of her friends at the time have been killed since then or died for one reason or another. And so it's a book about grief. It's a book about losing your community, of trying to find them, and then, you know, your found family. But also it's a book that talks about so many other, you know, parallels in other countries, and really like pays homage to the lesbians who are still being killed in Chechnya. It talks about, you know, queer communities across the world. And I really appreciated that it wasn't just from this like London Western perspective, and that Joelle Taylor had like done her research. She said in the poetry reading that she was doing a lot of research at the Glasgow Women's Library, which now I'm like determined to visit and go explore. Apparently they've got amazing archives there. But yeah, the coolest thing I think kind of formally about the collection is that it's written in this way that's very staged. It specifically has like stage directions, kind of like lighting descriptions and sound effect descriptions and things like that. So you really feel like you're witnessing a performance on the page. And then the metaphors and it reminded me a lot of in the Dreamhouse, because there's the main poem, like the subsections of the poem are called the body as battleground, the body as protest, the body as trespass, the body as cemetery, the body as backroom, the body as haunted house, the body as uprising. So there's that concept of thinking about the body as all of these different things. And I think the thing that landed most was this idea of the body as trespass. You know, the woman who claims her own body is already committing a sin or committing an act of violence or committing an outlawed thing, because the man is the one who owns the body. Like in society, in a patriarchal system, men are the ones that own the body and are entitled to the body, and women have to fight to have ownership of their own bodies. So I think that's what really landed with me. So let me read you a little section of this. Round 1, the body as battleground. You fall, miss your body entirely, land somewhere in enemy territory, behind the lines, your body a foreign country you cannot get a visa for. Your skin a parachute caught in the tree branches, you awaken in no man's land. Gunfire from over the horizon and women are crucified on hashtags across the dark hills. Your trench is crowded with dead women wearing faces that you try to escape them, the clothes of someone you once knew. There are landmines buried deep beneath your skin, and no one understands them. Tread softly when you walk across me. In between battle cry and bedroom is this sticky quiet, this no man's land. Men explode when you least expect it. All these lifetimes searching for body. So yeah, that gives you like an idea of this collection. It's so well done. I literally haven't connected so much with the collection. And I feel like, you know, you don't have to be a queer woman to appreciate the stuff that Joelle Taylor says about what it's like to inhabit a female body, because it literally feels like this for everybody. So I think this is like essential reading for any woman, and especially for men who want to know more about how it feels like to be in a female body in this world. So, C+nto, we love it. Okay. Something kind of different that I was exploring throughout the summer was the environment and the climate crisis. A lot because I really want to write about this for my dissertation, and I was kind of doing some initial research. So another poetry collection I read was Out of Time, Poetry from the Climate Emergency, edited by Kate Simpson. This is an anthology, so it collects poems from lots of different authors. I really loved the range of this collection. I thought the poetry itself was really well done. The topics it covered, like the sections of the collection, were emergency, grief, transformation, work, and rewilding. And the poems ranged from something, you know, really personal accounts of you know, specific creatures or specific animals or specific spaces, to kind of more philosophical approaches and explorations of, you know, how we're in denial of the fact that we're in a climate emergency. And yeah, one of my favorite poems is called Morality Play by Caroline Bird. And it starts, she said, I find it difficult to care about using plastic bags or burning diesel or eating vast quantities of beef, as I'm still not entirely convinced that any of this is real. I said, you mean climate change? She said, no, the world. I'm not sure the world is real, which makes it really hard to give a shit about recycling. I said, oh. She said, because what am I recycling exactly? Pixels? Images from someone else's dream? What looks and feels like a plastic bottle is probably just a speck of data in a video game, or a cookie. A cookie? Oh, I don't know. Each cloud of pollution is probably just a shadow passing over the sleeping eyelid of the alien. What alien? The alien whose dream we're in. That's like the opening of the poem. And I just think that's so, it just touches on something so absurd and ridiculous, but also so true about this generation, like our generation. We're just like interacting with these pixels, and then we're questioning the reality of the actual world that we can see with our eyes. Like, I've had conversations with friends where they were saying, oh, I saw this thing around town, but then later on I was like looking it up online and I couldn't find it. So I'm now questioning whether I actually saw it. I'm like, but you saw it with your own eyes. Like, how can you not trust your own eyes over the internet? So I think there's a poem in here about a polar bear and the ice caps melting, and how the polar bear was like swimming around looking for its home, and that was really heartbreaking. Ultimately, I don't think that this poetry collection is going to change the world. I think it's just another sign that change needs to happen, and that we are collectively grappling with these concepts and these ideas and the weight of the responsibility, and kind of, it's just a problem that we're all grappling with. But It didn't change my world, mainly because I was already convinced by a lot of this stuff, but it was very, very well written. And I did enjoy it. And the introduction in here is actually really good. So there's that. I then read, let's see, I read Strangers, Essays on the Human and Non-Human by Rebecca Tamas, which was amazing. It's so short and so jam-packed with insight, like genuine insight. So it talks a lot about the intersections between capitalism and climate change, or the climate crisis, and consumer culture and Western responsibility and kind of history. Talks a lot about kind of this slave labor and how, you know, just the incompatibilities between a lot, like within the Western mind. And I include myself in this because I live in the global north. I live in the UK. It's one of the biggest contributors to the climate crisis. There's this disassociation and this dissonance between what we believe and how we act. And it's because the system around us is so deeply entrenched in moral values and history and just convenience. So she says in one of the essays, I think it's the first essay, the consequences of redistributing wealth, of true equality, would be a very different world for the Western person than the consumer one they are used to. Whether that world would be one of no flying or cars, free public transport and allotments, or might have to be one of subsistence agriculture, no technology, no internet, no plastic, no money, I cannot say. It may depend on how quickly we attend to equality for human people and non-human beings and landscapes, and whether we are able to speedily reconsider the value we place on living beings who are not us. We human beings love comfort, and such a radically different world may not be as comfortable as what we in the West currently experience. Which is like the most accurate sentence I've ever read. But yeah, so the rest of the collection also then talks about being in relationship to non-human beings and to the uncanny. I think that's like probably the best word to describe it, but like the uncomfortable, the uncanny familiarity between us and non-human beings, and the disgust that we feel very often when we interact, say, with like a beetle or an insect or a slug that we don't bear any resemblance to, and how our empathy, in order to get through this next chapter of human history, in order to survive the Anthropocene, and not, you know, live in a world like The Road, Cormac McCarthy's like The Road post-apocalyptic nightmare, we need to find a way to empathize that doesn't rely on things like, but these animals are so cute, or they're so beautiful, or they provide value to us, and therefore they deserve life. It needs to be, these are creatures, these are living beings. We rely on the ecosystem and the diversity of the ecosystem, whether we like it or not, but that shouldn't be the primary reason we save it. Like, it should be also about the inherent value of nature itself, inherent value of diversity and creatures in the ecosystem on their own terms, you know? So it's a really challenging essay collection, even though it's very short. There's an essay in here on feminism as well, and like the female body and the relationship between, again, like systems of exploitation and the exploitation of the female body, and the relationship between the way that we treat non-human animals and the way that we treat women in society. And all of these problems, I think what I was realizing over the summer is that all of these problems are the same problem. And I think Rebecca Tamas does a really good job of like summing it up in a really short, concise, accessible way, but also challenging you to think differently. Hey, so this video is getting very long in editing, and so I'm gonna just skip over these books and I'll talk about them for like my dissertation reading list books video that I'm hoping to film, because a lot of them are quite academic, or I've read them in the context of my research. So that will be all for now. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I will chat to you soon.